Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller, here to help you fall asleep with these chilling horror stories. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is, so feel free to leave a comment. When you're ready, get comfortable and relax. Get all started. Step on in, drawled the on-duty detective as he eyed the flickering neon sign hanging over the entrance to our precinct in downtown Houston. His tone was laced with disdain, as if this interrogation were just another tedious drill in an endless shift. Let's see if your college training means anything out here. I was the youngest in our department, a full 20 years junior to the officer sitting just above me. Fresh from the Texas Police Academy and now thrust into the Homicide Division, I already sensed the icy skepticism from my older colleagues. Detective Mitchell, a grizzled veteran of the Texas Rangers, seemed to have taken a perverse pleasure in assigning me the most bizarre and dangerous cases. In just a few months, I'd encountered horrors that many seasoned officers might never imagine. It was soul-crushing, and I wasn't sure if it was deliberate harassment or a true test of my limits. Still, I was duty-bound, perhaps even idealistic. I wanted to do the job right. Maybe that's why the old guard grumbled behind my back. These young folks stick too rigidly to procedure. They ask too many damn questions. To them, my precise, almost academic approach was an unwelcome disruption of their time-honored, if unofficial, routines. Now, I stood in the corridor outside the interrogation room of the Galveston branch, the heavy metal door marked Interrogation with a small one-way glass. Behind it sat Katie Simmons, a slight reddish-brown young woman whose pallid complexion gave her an almost ghostly look. Oversized black glasses hid her eyes, which flickered with an unmistakable blend of fear and vulnerability. On first glance, she seemed defenseless, but I knew better. I'd seen the evidence, and I knew exactly what she was capable of. "Good afternoon, Katie. I'm Detective James Jim Carter," I said, my voice steady as I entered the room and took a seat at the plain metal table. I kept a deliberate distance, partly out of professional caution, and partly to keep myself from the unsettling aura I felt radiating from her. Katie lifted her gaze only briefly. At first, her eyes betrayed both uncertainty and, if one could sense it, a raw, almost palpable terror. "Detective, right?" she murmured, managing a nervous laugh. "I already told everything to the doctor at St. Luke's Hospital." "That doctor was a psychiatrist, Katie. I'm a detective. Since your friends passed away, we need to piece together what happened between April 24th and May 10th aboard the Lone Star." My tone was calm, yet firm. "Can you walk me through that period?" "Passed away?" Her eyes widened for a moment, as if the enormity of her loss had only now truly sunk in. "Dead, of course they're dead." She closed her eyes, her entire body tensing, as if trying to ward off an invisible assault. "It's something that's haunted me for as long as I can remember," she whispered, sniffling as she wiped away a tear. I watched her every shallow breath, noting the unsettling cadence of her speech, as though she were rehearsing a conversation with herself. "Stay with me, Katie," I said softly, yet with authority. "I know it's hard, but we have to understand what happened on April 24th. Katie drew in a shaky breath before beginning. "Nick, Simone, Tony, Hugo, and I, we all met at the University of Texas in Austin, in a course on classical antiquity. Our professor, Dr. Reynolds, he had some unconventional ideas. He'd write cryptic formulas on the board and then erase them, as if to constantly test us. And if you made even the tiniest mistake, it was like you'd failed the test of life itself." Her voice softened as bitterness crept in. The five of us quickly became inseparable, like misfits among a sea of conformist students. We hung out off campus, studied together, and celebrated every little victory. Then one day, we hatched the idea to take a sailing trip along the Texas Gulf. We were drawn by the legends of the sea, the myths of ancient heroes, and the spirit of adventure. This year, everything lined up perfectly. She paused, glancing briefly at the faded beige folder I kept at the edge of the table. Inside, I had already mentally mapped out the next steps. I would let her recount the events freely before confronting her with the damning photographs. I hoped her own words would expose the horror of what transpired, without me needing to prod too hard. It was Tony who suggested we rent a sailboat, Katie continued. Tony Miller, then, had some sailing experience? I asked casually, encouraging her to elaborate. Sort of, she replied, a wry note creeping into her tone. He'd been out on a little fishing boat on one of East Texas lakes a couple of times with his uncle. Hardly the sort of experience one needs to command an ocean-going vessel. But Tony was always a man who overestimated his abilities. He wanted to impress Simone, the athletic, adventurous type, and convinced us to charter a boat from a local operator in Port Aransas. The harbor master, a guy named Nick, was all smiles when he saw Tony's credit card. Money, after all, opens doors. Nobody asked for licenses or proof of expertise. Katie exhaled slowly. We were so young. We had no inkling of what could go wrong. The water was calm, almost picture-perfect as we set sail. Whitewashed cottages lining the coast, bobbing fishing boats and seagulls circling overhead. A real-life postcard. Naturally, we thought it would be the perfect vacation. So, you all set sail on April 24th? I interjected, leaning forward. Katie nodded. Exactly. We were all filled with excitement. The first day was pure bliss. We lounged on deck, soaked up the sun, and relaxed with some music and ice-cold beers. Hugo even whipped up a real dinner in the galley, and Nick strummed his guitar for a bit. It was like being in a dream. Her lips pressed together as if recalling a sudden grim memory. Then the storm hit. On the second day, April 25th, I remember clearly, we just finished dinner in the galley. Hugo's cooking was out of this world, but we'd all had a few too many. None of us noticed when the sea began to change, something only experienced mariners would detect. I leaned in, the tension palpable. How did the storm come on? Fast, in the blink of an eye, she said. The sky darkened suddenly. Then a torrential downpour hit, cutting our visibility down to mere feet. Tony couldn't figure out how to reef the sails in time. We didn't have a moment to react, and before we knew it, we were caught in monstrous waves taller than the boat itself. We capsized as easily as a tossed nut, only to be righted by one massive surge, then hit again from the other side. Katie's voice faltered as if she were sorting through a barrage of nightmarish images. We huddled in the cramped cabin, soaked to the bone and shivering from the cold. The walls groaned under the assault, and the boat creaked as if in agony. By dawn, the storm had subsided enough for us to realize our GPS, radio, life rings, everything was gone. We were stranded in the middle of the Gulf, with no idea where we were. That must have been terrifying, I murmured, trying to steady my own racing thoughts as I recalled the evidence we'd collected. Hunger and thirst soon took over. Katie continued, her voice trembling. We scoured the boat for anything salvageable, but nearly everything was ruined by salt water. The hull was badly damaged, and Tony, he was a wreck. Not just physically, but mentally. He kept insisting he was to blame for all our misfortunes. We even tried to rig makeshift nets out of torn fabric to catch fish, though none of us truly knew what we were doing. Collecting rainwater was a lost cause without a proper container. Everything was in shambles. I felt the room tighten around us. My palms were sweating as I listened, aware of the incriminating evidence we had against her. I knew how gruesome the photographs in my folder were. Images of torn doors, blood-smeared walls, and shattered wood. Yet, Katie still seemed unable to fully comprehend her involvement. "And then?" I asked. "What happened next?" Katie's eyes met mine, as if a wall of fear had risen between us. "We managed to hold on for about a day. We tried to sleep, comfort one another, plan something. But by the end of the second day, our minds were clouded by thirst. With no source of fresh water, some of us even began to drink seawater, and that only made everything worse." Her voice began to shake with emotion. "After that, everything blurred. I can't tell if it was days or just a fever dream. Maybe it was delirium. All I know is..." "In any case," I pressed gently. She swallowed hard. "I can't explain it. You might not believe me, but there's something inside me." "Something inside you?" "My shadow." I slid the worn folder open just a crack. "Katie, I have these photographs. Images that capture the gruesome aftermath. Cabin walls gouged as if clawed by desperate fingers, smashed doors, and traces of blood everywhere. There are even remnants of your friends." I produced one image, deep scratches on the wooden wall, as though someone had tried to rip their way out with nothing but bare nails. Katie's breathing hitched. "I didn't do that, at least not on my own. I'm not strong enough to tear a door from its hinges. Look at me." She raised her thin arms, almost trembling with disbelief. "But you were the only one found on board, in a state of feverish delirium, and when the doctors at St. Luke's pumped your stomach, they found human tissue. The DNA matched that of your friends." Her eyes glazed over and she whispered, "My shadow, don't you understand? I'm cursed, ever since I was a little girl growing up here in Texas. I was about 9 when a mysterious woman appeared on our school playground. She offered me a gold coin for 13 strands of my hair. I thought it was just a game. My parents only found out much later, and that's when my shadow changed." She went on to describe how her father, a local businessman entangled with unsavory characters, had been involved in shady dealings, vengeance, and a long-standing curse on our family. Katie recalled odd incidents from her childhood, like the time in 3rd grade when she'd bitten off a classmate's ear in a fit of uncontrollable rage. After that, strange events followed, as though dark forces were at work. At least, that's what her fragmented memories insisted. "People always think I'm crazy," she said bitterly. "They say I'm borderline, that I have aggressive tendencies. They put me on medication. Nothing ever helped, except trying to control myself. Normally, I can keep that inner voice at bay, but when I'm under extreme stress, when I'm on the brink, my shadow takes over, and that monster inside me comes out. I swear I've tried to stop it." "So you believe you didn't commit those acts, that some dark force, a demon of sorts, did?" I asked quietly. "I don't know what to call it," she replied, her voice trembling between despair and anger. "Call it a spirit, a demon, a curse. But it's real. It's taken my childhood, my friends, my entire life, and now nobody believes me." I studied her, struck by the stark contradiction. Her frail frame and soft voice hardly seemed capable of such monstrous deeds, yet the forensic evidence was damning, a reality that defied logic. "Katie," I said gently, "can you control this shadow right here in this room?" Her pupils dilated in a mix of fear and defiance. "If I could, I'd banish it for good. But once you push what's lurking inside, it might end just as it did on the boat." I knew not to push too far, yet I couldn't help my fascination. The DA is charging you with multiple counts of murder. We've recovered samples from your stomach, traces under your fingernails, even on your teeth. Without a supernatural confession or evidence of another force at work, the justice system will treat you as just another killer." At that moment, something in Katie shifted. Her expression hardened, and her voice turned inhuman. A deep, guttural rumble that seemed to echo off the walls even at a low volume. The overhead light flickered. The hum of the air conditioner became erratic. "So, you really want to know?" Her words boomed around the small room, as if coming from every dark corner. "Then, open your eyes." She sprang to her feet, and the chain on her handcuffs shattered as if it were made of paper. My hands trembled as I flung open the door and stumbled into the corridor, nearly colliding with Detective Mitchell, who waited with 2 other officers. His eyes were cold, watching to see if I was about to lose control. "Afraid of a little girl, Carter?" he sneered in his southern drawl. But his smirk vanished when he saw Katie standing eerily still in the doorway, her handcuffs in pieces at her wrists. The officers rushed in, grabbed her, and in a heartbeat, Katie sank back into her chair as if nothing had happened. The room's light seemed to return to normal, and the security camera recorded everything without a hitch. Yet the shattered cuffs were undeniable. Mitchell shot me a suspicious glance. I could almost feel him silently accusing me of tampering with the evidence for a show. His face grew pale as he noticed my unsteady hands. Something inexplicable had occurred that none of us could fully understand. Shortly afterward, Katie vanished from the station. For security reasons, she's been transferred, I was told, with no hint as to her destination. I stood there, dumbfounded, clutching a lukewarm cup of vending machine coffee that nearly slipped from my grasp in shock. The ensuing weeks were a waking nightmare. I saw Katie's face in my dreams, her features shifting, the gruesome images of the boat, and the dismembered remains of her 4 friends haunting my every thought. Torn between rational explanations, mental illness, hallucinations, and the undeniable physical evidence I had witnessed, I found myself spiraling. Katie was conveniently convicted soon after. The evidence was overwhelming. Forensic tests left no doubt that human flesh had been consumed. Her claims of a cursed shadow were dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed mind. Yet, even in Huntsville State Prison, the notorious facility where she was first held, mysterious events began to unfold. One night, a notoriously harsh corrections officer was found lifeless against a cell wall opposite hers, his eye sockets charred as though a fire had erupted from within. Rumors spread of a strange burst of light that some claimed to have witnessed in the corridor. Shortly after, another inmate, described as brutally sadistic, disappeared. Remnants of her body were later discovered in the drainage system of the shared cell block. No one would publicly admit how such impossibilities occurred. Ultimately, Katie was quietly transferred to another facility, yet the pattern persisted. Unexplained power outages, bloodstains in impossible places, and every new case revealing another horrifying detail. I obsessively tracked every report, even though Detective Mitchell ordered me repeatedly to focus on current cases. The Lone Star case, marked top secret in our files, would not let me go. Night after night, I pored over old documents, psychiatric evaluations, and even obscure legends from rural Texas. I uncovered tales of ancient curses that haunted entire families, of dark forces rising from the shadows when their victims were at their most vulnerable. Then, one day, I learned that Katie had been released, quietly and under mysterious circumstances. Her file bore only a cryptic note: conditional release on medical advice, location undisclosed. My heart raced. How could someone convicted of multiple murders receive such leniency, and without proper documentation, no further answers came. Detective Mitchell curtly ordered me to return to active cases. Perhaps he too felt an inexplicable dread whenever Katie's name surfaced. I still see her in my dreams, or maybe it's that dark, lurking shadow, a silhouette that haunts the corners of my vision. I wake in cold sweats, haunted by the thought that this curse, this malevolent force entwined with Katie, might one day find me too. What if there's truth in her words? What if her shadow is a living entity that craves blood when Katie is at her weakest? So, here I sit in the dim light of my office, a folder of forbidden details on the Lone Star case spread out before me. I should have turned everything over to the state archives, yet the faces of the dead and Katie's whispered confessions continue to haunt me. Part of me longs to find her someday to finally get answers. Another part prays that I never cross paths with her again, because if her shadow is real, and if it must feed, it will move on as soon as Katie is in danger, and who knows who might fall victim next. I know one thing: some mysteries in this world defy the laws of logic. Anyone who dismisses Katie as merely crazy might be in for a harsh awakening. I close the folder one final time, the photographs glaring back at me. Splintered doors, blood-smeared walls, and the skeletal remains of her 4 friends found on the wreckage of the boat. Beside them, an image of Katie, rescued in a state of utter shock, drenched from head to toe, eyes half-lidded in disbelief. The report read, "Patient suffered severe dehydration and was only partially responsive," marked by violent abrasions on her fingernails and traces of human DNA in her stomach contents. I press my hand against the photo, and goosebumps crawl across my skin. I cannot change it. This is the cold, unvarnished truth in our so-called rational world. I switch off the overhead light and step out into the drizzling Houston night. In a city that never truly falls into darkness, I search in vain for my own shadow on the pavement, as though the weak glow of streetlights had swallowed it whole. And I can't help but ask, where is Katie now? Will there be another inexplicable murder spree without any logical explanation? Will I once again find myself at a crime scene in full protective gear, my stomach clenching as I realize deep down that this is the work of that unearthly shadow? These thoughts will not leave me. The Lone Star case has burrowed into my mind like a splinter that refuses to be dislodged. Perhaps that was exactly what my superiors intended, to test how much one can endure before the mind finally cracks. Or maybe it was simply the dark fate that binds Katie and me. And if she's truly out there roaming free, who will protect us from the hunger of her shadow next? I work at the Lone Star Gazette, a small local newspaper nestled in the heart of Texas. Our office occupies a nondescript brick building in a modest new development on the outskirts of Laredo, a relic of the 70s with long corridors, faded linoleum floors, and a heater that rattles even on balmy summer nights. The stale aroma of reheated coffee and old printer ink lingers in every corner. After graduating from college in Austin, I'd hoped for more exciting assignments. But the media business is tough. Usually, I cover local county fairs, visits to animal shelters, or interview small-town ranchers. Still, I keep at it, and my boss, Mr. Carter, has noticed my determination. Not long ago, he handed me a big break of sorts. I was to investigate why the local garbage service had been delayed for weeks. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. Until that one gloomy morning changed everything. On a leaden, overcast day when a fine, steady drizzle pounded relentlessly against the window, Mr. Carter beckoned me into his cramped, cluttered office. Stacks of paperwork and notepads filled every available surface. Lowering his voice, he confided that he'd got me a real doozy. I was to drive out to a small town called Lone Oak, an unremarkable dot on the map, despite its proud name, and dig into the mystery of a stranger who had been cuffed and hauled into the police station in broad daylight, his clothes stained with blood. No one seemed to know who he was. The police wouldn't say a word. This was exactly the story I needed to break free from my routine provincial assignments. I stared at him in disbelief. A blood-soaked stranger with no clear identity, like something out of a hard-boiled crime novel. With a mix of excitement and trepidation, I grabbed my notepad and set off in our battered newsroom car, a beat-up Ford Mustang from the early 90s that had seen better days. The town of Lone Oak turned out to be every bit as nondescript as its name implied. A sleepy settlement tucked between endless mesquite groves and vast open fields. The rain fell even harder here. I parked in front of a modern, surprisingly well-kept police station that jutted out among a few old storefronts, and a small town square dominated by a worn memorial, honoring local heroes of World War II. It was odd to see such a contemporary building in a town that otherwise seemed stuck in time. From a distance, I could see uniformed officers milling about. The station's front yard was cordoned off, and a patrol car sat askew near the entrance. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment in silence, the steady drumming of rain on the Mustang's roof echoing in my ears. My mind raced. What if this guy was dangerous? Should I barge right in and demand an interview? Taking a deep breath, I clutched my notepad tighter and stepped out. The chilly, driving rain lashed my face, a stark reminder that even though summer should have been warm, something about today felt oddly autumnal. Inside, the police station was nearly sterile. Bright white walls lit by cold LED lights that cast everything in a faint blue hue. To my left was a small bench, and to my right a reception desk manned by a stocky officer whose cheeks were flushed as he flipped through some paperwork. As I approached, he looked up, frowned for a moment, and then broke into a surprised smile. "Hey, aren't you Tommy Carter's kid?" "Well, I'll be," he exclaimed. I recognized him immediately. This was Officer Jackson, an old friend of my father from his days with the Texas Highway Patrol. I recalled him vaguely from a backyard barbecue years ago, though the memory was hazy. I nodded, brushed rain droplets from my worn denim jacket, and flashed my press badge. "Yeah, that's right. I'm with the Lone Star Gazette now. I heard you guys brought in a fella in blood-soaked clothes. I'd like to speak with him if possible. I'm officially on the case." Instantly, Officer Jackson's expression hardened. "If you ask me, you'd do better not talking to him. I doubt he's got anything you want to hear," he said in a serious, almost worried tone. "But I have a job to do," I replied. "And isn't he allowed to have a visitor until he's formally charged?" Jackson merely shrugged, then gestured toward a side door leading down a narrow corridor. The hallways twisted unexpectedly as we made our way through a maze of back rooms until we reached a secluded area where a row of temporary holding cells awaited. A heavy steel gate barred the passage. Jackson produced a hefty key with a loud clank as the metal gate swung open. "He's in the last cell, cell number 4, Jackson explained. "The man calls himself Grayson, or at least that's what he says his name is. I'm going to stick around here. If anything happens, you give me a shout, all right?" I nodded silently, my heart pounding. Grayson, such a plain name, yet he carried an aura of mystery. I moved slowly past the empty cells until I reached the back, where in the dim light sat a man in a blood-stained shirt. He barely lifted his gaze as I approached. Grayson wore what had once been a crisp white shirt, now marred by deep, rusty stains of blood. Over it, a rumpled blazer that looked out of place in today's world, a relic, perhaps, of an old business meeting. Tall and lean, with thinning, almost pale hair, his tired eyes held a calm intensity. Noticing my press credentials and notepad, he spoke softly, almost inaudibly. "So you're here to hear my story, huh? I suppose you're a reporter." Swallowing hard, I responded, "Yes. I'd like to find out what happened. Folks around here are rattled by the way you were picked up, completely covered in blood." He offered a vague nod. "I understand their concern, but I'm afraid they won't believe what really went down." He paused, then gestured toward my notepad. "Write it all down. Maybe you'll be the one who believes me, or at least give someone out there a chance to know what cursed Lone Oak has witnessed." "Cursed Lone Oak?" I echoed as I flipped open a fresh page. My curiosity was piqued, though a part of me feared that what I was about to hear might be more than I bargained for. He began slowly, his voice rough and haunted. "It all started when I was just a kid, around 9 or 10, growing up near Abilene. For months, I was tormented by nightmares, visions of a strange, deserted town where the residents twisted into monstrous forms, where buildings rotted away under a sky that bled red. At the center of it all, I saw a split in the earth, from which flames and noxious smoke erupted." He shuddered as if the memories burned. "My parents took me to doctors, counselors, even our local pastor. Eventually, the nightmares subsided for reasons I never could explain. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination, until just before my high school graduation, when they vanished completely. I thought maybe it was just a phase, a child's fancy." I scribbled frantically. His words, laden with an eerie authenticity, made it difficult to interrupt. Years passed. I grew up, went to college, worked a steady job in administration, got married, and then divorced. Just as ordinary as anyone else's life. Then came the fateful business trip with my partner, a man named Schmidt. We were driving across West Texas to review some contracts, mostly sticking to country roads to avoid the gridlock on the highways. One evening, we ended up in a backwater town called Hayneville, a forgotten dot on the map boasting barely 45 residents. It looked like a ghost town, as if it could vanish at any moment. Still, we noticed a small diner named Groceries and Grinds and decided to grab a beer. We were exhausted from the drive, you know. He paused to emphasize the ordinariness of the moment. Just two men on a business trip looking for a cold drink on a hot night. But the moment I stepped into that diner, he continued, voice trembling, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. The layout of the tables, the worn counter, even the faded poster for some local brew. I'd seen it all before in those childhood nightmares from 3 decades past. And behind the counter was a man whose face struck me as horribly familiar. I recalled dreaming of a man whose face was stripped of muscle and flesh in a ghastly display. In a flash, I realized the man at the counter was the same one from my dreams, only older. Panic seized me and I bolted from the diner. Schmidt followed, growling, demanding to know what was wrong. I lied, saying I felt sick, but Schmidt wasn't fooled. He knew something was off. Grayson's eyes darkened, and it was clear how real these memories were to him. Whether madness or truth, I couldn't tell. In my dreams, away from that diner, there was a clearing deep in the woods where a circle of ancient stones lay arranged like a seal. Some stones bore scratched symbols, maybe old Native American petroglyphs or relics of early settlers. The air smelled of damp moss and decay, like untouched wilderness. In that moment, I could have sworn my nightmares were unfolding right before my eyes. Schmidt grabbed me, demanding I tell the truth. Fear took over. I saw him pull out a revolver from beneath his jacket. That's when I acted on pure instinct. I grabbed one of the stones from the circle and struck him on the head. He crumpled, and a gush of blood spilled forth. Blood that didn't behave naturally, as if the earth itself was hungrily absorbing it through a crack among the stones. A deep rumble echoed from beneath the ground, as though something ancient was awakening. And I knew then the seal had been broken. He trembled violently, and I felt chills despite the stuffy confines of the holding cell. Then the ground began to shake, and the air filled with a sulphurous stench. I saw flashes of light, as if flames were bursting from the earth. I fled, leaving everything behind. I even abandoned Schmidt's car keys, retrieving them only later in a panicked haze. I ran until I reached the outskirts of the town, hoping to find help or at least my own car. But instead, I stumbled into another nightmare. The townspeople began to change, just like in my old dreams. Their faces contorted, eyes bulged, and their teeth became monstrous. Some ran screaming. Others, it seemed, succumbed to a terrifying transformation. My heart pounded as I listened, the room growing colder with each word. I ducked into a tiny local pharmacy, hoping for a sedative or something to steady my nerves. The elderly pharmacist appeared kind at first, while her husband manned the counter. But then, before my eyes, her skull split open at the crown, and her brain spilled out like a macabre, snarling mask. She lunged at her husband as he cried out in horror. I knocked over a shelf and caught a spray of blood splattering against the wallpaper before fleeing in terror. Outside, the sky darkened to an almost unnatural purple, and a furious wind whipped around me. A storm that seemed to come straight from hell. Screams filled the narrow streets as neighbors transformed into hideous creatures. Grayson pressed his hand to his brow, his voice a mere whisper. I raced back to the motel where I'd parked my car. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the keys. Before I could drive away, an ancient man, skin mottled and fragile, yet with eyes burning in wrath, appeared out of nowhere. Grabbing my arm, he bellowed, "What have you done? Have you desecrated the sacred circle? Now the curse is unleashed, and you must make it right." He ranted about burning Schmidt's body to break the curse or returning to kill every monster, but I was too frightened to do either. I fled as fast as I could, feeling that I had only made matters worse. I eventually hit the highway, driving north at over 75 miles per hour. At some point, I lost control. The car spun out and crashed into a woman's van. I remember nothing but a red blur. When I came to, I was being pulled from the wreckage by flashing blue lights and the wail of sirens. And that's how I ended up here. They say the blood on my shirt came mostly from the accident. Mixed up with other victims, I can't really tell. All I know is that I failed. I let the evil loose. He fell silent, and I stood there, notepad half filled, mind reeling with images too wild to comprehend. I was deeply shaken by his account. I wanted to press for more details, but wasn't sure if it was wise to push a man who might be losing his grip on reality. I politely excused myself and returned to Officer Jackson, whose raised eyebrows hinted at skepticism. Crazy talk, huh? You really believe his devilish ramblings? Jackson asked quietly. I hesitated. He doesn't sound like a complete liar. There's a desperation in his voice. What's the official word? Jackson pulled me aside, lowering his voice. They say he was caught with drugs in his car, and that he crashed into a van. 3 kids died. Witnesses claim he was driving like a maniac. The blood on his shirt? Likely from the victims. Whether he's concocting a wild story to dodge responsibility, who knows? Inside, my thoughts churned. On one hand, Grayson's tale was so grotesque it defied belief. On the other, I'd never met anyone speak with such fervor. What if there was a kernel of truth buried in his madness? I knew I had to try to verify at least some of the facts for my article. I asked Officer Jackson if there were any records of a town called Hayneville. He consulted the police database and frowned. There's no Hayneville in this region, at least not as he describes it. There's Hainwood or Hainfield, but Hayneville? Nothing. Maybe he's made it up. Does that help? I wasn't sure what to think, so I thanked him and stepped back out into the rain, which now fell in heavy sheets. An uneasy feeling gripped me, as if a storm of more than weather was brewing. On the modest town square of Lone Oak, where locals usually pinned flyers for county fairs or craft markets, I noticed a battered old notice board. Tacked onto it was a faded document in archaic script detailing a local legend. A stone circle said to lie deep in the Texas brush, a remnant of pre-colonial times used in dark rituals, capable of opening a gateway to hell. In weathered words it read, "He who spills blood upon this sacred ground shall awaken the wrath of the hidden." A shiver ran down my spine. Was it coincidence, or did it all tie into Grayson's story? While I lingered before the board, an elderly man approached, leaning heavily on a worn cane. His watery blue eyes and frail appearance made him seem almost ghost-like. "Looking for something, son?" he asked in a slow drawl. I explained that I was a reporter investigating a bizarre incident linked to an old stone circle legend. His face fell instantly. "I've heard these tales before. My grandfather told me of a hidden place past the mesquite groves, once known as the Bloodstones. Folks avoided it, saying strange things happened there as far back as the 1800s. Cattle dying mysteriously, people vanishing without a trace. They say an ancient demon, or something like it, is sealed away there. But nowadays, most dismiss it as old superstitions." I inquired if he'd ever heard of a town named Hayneville. Shaking his head, he murmured that some old records hinted at a place that had long since been abandoned. Its name changed over time. He didn't know more, but his fear was palpable. Feeling unsettled, I returned to the station where I'd left my car. The rain had eased briefly, but was now coming down in torrents again. In the lobby, the atmosphere was quieter. Some officers were off on another call. I felt compelled to speak with Grayson once more. Perhaps I'd missed a crucial question that might either debunk his wild tale or confirm its eerie truth. Officer Jackson, surprised to see me heading back, said, "Back again?" "Fine, but be quick. They're transferring him soon. To the county jail over in San Angelo, I hear." I approached the cell again. Grayson was slumped against the back wall, head bowed. When I mentioned my name, he lifted his eyes slowly. "You're back. Found the truth?" he asked softly. Clearing my throat, I said, "I found hints, old legends of a stone circle and a forgotten town. What if you really discovered something there? What if this town, as you describe, isn't even on any official map?" He regarded me with tired eyes. "Maybe it lies off the beaten path, a place that's been known by many names over the years. In my nightmares there was always a fog, a sense of something lost. I can't explain it, only that something supernatural happened, and I was the one holding the key to stop it. Instead, I unleashed it." My hands trembled as I scribbled down every word. It was all too much for a young reporter accustomed to writing about county fairs. Yet here were ancient powers and demonic apparitions in a tiny Texan town. Should I dig deeper? Or was Grayson merely a desperate man trying to dodge responsibility? I left without another word. His final whisper, a mix of bitterness and fragile hope, reached me. "Write the truth, if you can find it." That story would haunt me for days. Instead of heading straight back to the newsroom, I detoured to the county archives in San Angelo. An elderly archivist, Mrs. Roberts, welcomed my inquiry about old legends, specifically any mention of stone circles or vanished towns in this region. She rifled through dusty files dating back to the 19th century and eventually found a reference to Hainestead, a settlement reportedly abandoned around 1700 after unclean rituals or a mysterious illness drove its residents away. Some accounts even hinted at demonic occurrences. Mrs. Roberts frowned and murmured, "It could all be just folklore." Yet Hainstead sounded disturbingly close to Hainville. In an old church record, I found a note about a devil's ring, a place where witches supposedly met under the cover of night. They say, if the blood of sinners is spilled here, a rift to the underworld opens, I read aloud, feeling the chill of its implications. Mrs. Roberts looked at me in astonishment. "Where did you hear that?" she asked. But that's just how folks used to explain misfortune back then. Armed with these scraps of history, I slowly drove back to the office as late afternoon turned the overcast sky a deep, bruised violet. An eerie weight seemed to hang over Lone Oak, as if an unseen force hovered in the air. Was it all in my head, or was it the echo of Grayson's harrowing account? At the newsroom that next morning, as I sat before my laptop, Mr. Carter burst in. "Got anything solid?" he demanded. I recounted Grayson's story and showed him my notes. He frowned deeply, lighting cigarette after cigarette, despite the no-smoking policy, and finally said, "That all sounds like straight-up horror. Do you really believe it? We're a local newspaper, not a paranormal blog. People will laugh us out of town." I shrugged. "That's all I have. I can either spin it as satire or report it as a mysterious incident and hope someone out there takes notice. After all, there are folks online who believe in the paranormal." Mr. Carter stroked his chin. "All right, publish it under your byline on our blog. Just don't make us look completely foolish." So I typed, word for word, Grayson's account in sprawling detail, recounting the ancient legend, the stone circle, and the town that might not even officially exist. I left it ambiguous whether his story was real or the ramblings of a man trying to excuse his crimes. I even added the archival tidbits. Then I published it under the headline, "The Devil's Circle of Lone Oak, a Texan legend or a brutal reality." The article drew its share of attention. Commenters ranged from skeptics to conspiracy theorists. Some demanded the precise location of this cursed site, while others mocked the idea that I'd bought into such a tall tale. Weeks later, the frenzy began to die down, but I couldn't forget it. Night after night, I'd wake in a cold sweat. Images of that ancient stone circle, flames licking the earth, desperate screams echoing, haunting my dreams. Had I been too deeply influenced by Grayson's tale? Eventually, I decided to check in with Officer Jackson once more to learn what had become of Grayson. Jackson told me that Grayson had been transferred to a forensic psychiatric facility after his lawyer pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. He didn't have any more details, and the records were sealed from public view. Should I return to the archives for further clues? I did, a few times, only to uncover more fragments of old lore that offered little in the way of concrete evidence. No one could definitively say where Hainestead, or Hainville as Grayson might have called it, was ever located. Some spoke of a ghost town deep in the brush. Others dismissed it as pure legend. Yet, on certain stormy nights, when the rain hammered my window and the sky shimmered with an eerie red glow, I'd find myself rereading my blog post. The words of Grayson about the gaping fissure, the blood, the unspeakable creatures. And wonder, what if there really is something out there? An ancient curse, a broken seal, a long-forgotten evil waiting to break free. I have no solid proof. But my heart races every time a violent storm rolls in or a low, ominous rumble echoes across the plains. Perhaps I think we've already lost the battle, choosing flight over facing down the darkness. And maybe, just maybe, the gates of hell have been unlocked right here in Texas. I was researching a term paper on local history for college when I stumbled upon an old microfilm edition of the Lone Star Chronicle. One headline made my heart skip a beat. Unidentified man found dead. Police suspect foul play and supernatural forces. The article was sparse on details. It mentioned that the body had been discovered in the same remote stretch of West Texas where I'd once lived. A lonely stretch of scrubland and mesquite groves near the Rio Grande. I closed my eyes and tried to sort through the memories. Hadn't there been talk of a violent storm back then? Fuzzy images and sounds returned. Strange, terrifying days. I recalled seeing a man outside our farmhouse. Could he have been connected to the victim? I even remembered being questioned by local officers shortly before our family moved away. And then, all the memories rushed back. It was a tempestuous autumn evening, and I was at home in our little farmhouse, tucked away on a dusty road on the outskirts of West Texas. Outside, the wind howled over cracked gravel roads. The rain pounded relentlessly on the windows, and sudden torrents, fed by the deluge, turned dry creek beds into raging waterways. The storm seemed almost alive, as if it were stirring something deep and inexplicable. In the small, dimly lit kitchen, my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, were engaged in a tense conversation. Their low, almost conspiratorial whispers had always hinted that there was more beneath the surface. And that little girl needs friends. Not just ghosts, my mother suddenly exclaimed, her voice laden with more than simple worry. My father hushed her quickly, and soon they were murmuring again, words I could barely decipher, but whose urgency sent shivers down my spine. I tried to lose myself in a book, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the eerie sounds the storm carried with it. When the clock chimed again, the old radio in the kitchen switched to a news bulletin. The severe storm is battering even the smallest communities along the Texas border. Reports of landslides and bizarre, unexplained phenomena are mounting. Witnesses say clocks have stopped and time itself seems to be shifting. Disturbing evidence, including injuries on disfigured bodies that defy natural decay, has been found. Did you hear that, Bill? My mother raised her voice once more. Did you hear? The blasted road is gone, and something feels off, like we're being watched from the darkness. I couldn't understand my father's reply. It was as if he was trying to shield me from an unbearable truth. Soon, their conversation dissolved into a jumble of anxious whispers that spoke of fear and secrets. The wind roared so fiercely it drowned out every other sound. As dusk deepened into a dark, oppressive night, I huddled closer to the crackling fireplace. A cool shiver ran down my back as I finished a particularly grim story from my collection of ghost tales, lost in the dance of the flames. Then, a faint, deliberate scratching came from the wall that faced the shadowy mesquite grove. My heart nearly stopped. Something was scratching that wall. Was it an animal, a loose branch, or, worse, a supernatural presence? Thoughts of Texas legends, of ghostly riders and restless spirits flashed through my mind, but I forced myself not to panic. Surely, it was only a branch dislodged by the fierce wind, I told myself. But then I heard a sound, a howl that almost sounded human, a mournful wail that resembled the cry of a lost soul, rather than the simple gust of wind. I set my book aside and struggled to cling to reason, though deep down I knew this storm harbored more than mere rain and wind. A dull, nearly imperceptible thud against the back wall made me freeze. I sat there, paralyzed by the thought that the wind might be carrying not only debris, but even remnants of our past. I debated whether to creep to the small window overlooking the dark brushland to take a look, but the haunting image of a spectral face from an old Texan ghost story held me back. With trembling legs, I retreated, vowing silently never to read such gloomy tales again, and to be more cautious in the future. When the wind began howling again in a near-human tone, layered with a deep, guttural rumble, the tension in the house grew unbearable. It wasn't only the raw force of nature that night, it was as if the very elements had joined in an unholy chorus. Suddenly, the kitchen door creaked open. My father, Mr. Miller, stepped inside and gave me a gentle, knowing smile as he looked at me, wide-eyed. "Honey, these kinds of stories won't let you sleep," he said, before gently instructing me to head to bed. With shaking steps, I made my way through the dark hallway, past the front door. A door with a small frosted window that always reminded me of a ghostly sailor's face from one of those eerie legends. My heart pounded as I drew the curtains tight, ensuring not even a sliver of darkness could sneak in. I jumped into bed and pulled the blanket over me, as though protecting myself from an unseen threat. Soon after, my father returned to give me a goodnight kiss, and the darkness enveloped me. That night, as the storm raged relentlessly and the wind's mournful cries echoed through our home, my sleep was shattered by unsettling sounds. I awoke suddenly in the dark, unsure how long I had slept. The room was thick with a sense of impending doom, and I silently vowed never to read ghost stories again. But the worst was yet to come. In the silence, I began to hear footsteps. Soft, deliberate steps outside, right before the door. I sat there, trembling, unable to tear my eyes away. Footsteps? I tried to dismiss them as the wind. I flicked on the light, and a crashing clap of thunder made the house tremble. In a rash moment, I bolted down the hall toward the front door, the very door that always filled me with an uneasy dread. As I reached the doorway, I forced myself not to look back. But curiosity got the better of me, and I stole a glance. My breath caught in my throat. In the small window, a ghostly face stared back. A man with wild, unhinged eyes, his hair drenched and sticking out in disarray, and a sneering grin that seemed both mocking and menacing. I stood frozen, unable to move. Then, in that frozen moment of terror, I let out a scream, a piercing cry that reverberated off the walls. I kept shouting, "He was there! There's a man out there!" Yet, when I looked again at the window, only impenetrable darkness remained. "Oh, sweetheart, there's nothing there," my mother said soothingly. "No, I saw him," I sobbed, as she comforted me with a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Everything's all right, darling. Your father'll go take a look," she reassured me. My father rose and walked to the door. He glanced outside, then suddenly his face turned pale with panic. He opened the door, and as he grasped the handle, the door banged open with a deafening crash. A fierce gust of wind hurled rain into the house. In an instant, I was soaked, and my scream grew louder in terror. Mr. Miller, always our steadfast protector, peeked out, shuddered, and then shut the door with trembling hands. When he turned back, his face was as pale as a full moon. There's nothing," he stammered, unable to offer me any real comfort. "Nothing. At all." "Daddy, I saw a man," I pleaded. "Sweetheart, you're just imagining things," he tried to say in a calm tone as he locked the door. But then, almost imperceptibly, his voice shifted to English with an edge of strain. "There's nothing out there, I promise." His words sent a chill down my spine. My mother, who had held me tight, pulled me even closer. I could see her expression change in an instant, a blend of fear and a secret knowledge she couldn't explain. The next 3 days dragged on like an eternity. My parents boarded up every window. insisting that the storm and the bizarre events were too dangerous. I wasn't allowed outside. The radio had fallen silent. Apparently, they wanted to keep us safe from something unseen. As I sought comfort in books, I could feel that something was terribly wrong. My father made tense phone calls, and strange notes appeared in his investigation files. Notes exchanged quietly by local police who were working on a case with eerie, inexplicable elements. Then, on the morning of the fourth day, I heard a new, peculiar noise. A rapid, rhythmic thumping, like the flutter of a flag in the wind. Except there was no flag on our wall. I cried out, "Mom, what's that?" "That's a helicopter, sweetheart," she answered in a trembling voice. "The police are here, investigating the destroyed road and something they found in the yard." "Really? Does that mean we can get out with the helicopter?" I asked, incredulous. "Let's wait and see, honey," she replied. Soon, I found myself stepping onto the wet lawn, now marked off with police tape and covered by large tarps. An officer led me to a sketch artist who was trying to capture every detail of the face I had seen. The officers were baffled. The disfigured, unidentified man, described by investigators as supernaturally aged, showed no signs of natural decay, as if time itself had stood still for him. The local police could not explain how the murder had occurred. There was no evidence, no footprints, no blood traces, and even the timestamps seemed off. Some officers even reported that their watches had inexplicably been reset in the area, a phenomenon that only deepened the mystery, aligning with other reports of paranormal influences in the region. One file from the sheriff's office ominously referred to it as the curse of the scrublands. Later, I learned that during their search of our property, officers had discovered not only a disfigured body, but also strange markings in the earth, traces that defied any natural explanation. Rumors began to swirl that a local curse had haunted these Texas lands for centuries, sealing the fate of anyone who dared challenge it. Newspaper headlines soon darkened our lives further. Unidentified man found disfigured, head missing without a trace. Police baffled as time and reality seemed to warp. Mysterious murder. Family trapped for 3 days, supernatural forces at work. My world crumbled piece by piece as I read the final headline. Family trapped for 3 days amid storm. Disfigured body in the yard. Unsolved murder, and the perpetrator vanishes without a trace, despite police investigations suggesting paranormal activity. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized the chilling truth. These horrifying events, the mutilated victim, the spectral face in the window, the inexplicable phenomena, had touched my very own family. In a desperate online search, I managed to access records from the local sheriff's office, which listed the case as an unsolved paranormal incident. 2 men had survived the storm, the dark scrubland, and the rugged hills surrounding our home, only for one to decapitate the other near our front door before vanishing without a trace. The investigators were left with more questions than answers. Was the man in the window the murderer or the victim? Why had time refused to follow its natural course? And what did the strange markings in the soil signify? Even now, the questions remain unanswered, and this case is recorded as one of the most mysterious and unsettling incidents in Texas history.